Have you ever been completely alone at home, thinking you had all the time in the world to relax, only to suddenly feel like something wasn't right? Like deep down you knew something or someone was watching you. Imagine it, the silence, the emptiness of the house, and then a noise, a sound that makes your heart race, a creak in the floorboards, a door that slowly clicks open on its own. You tell yourself it's nothing, just the house settling, but the pit in your stomach tells you otherwise. Now imagine in that moment you realize you weren't as safe as you thought. You were never really alone at all. These are true stories of people just like you. They were home alone, going about their lives, thinking everything was normal. But things took a terrifying turn. Things they never could have predicted. What started as a quiet night quickly turned into a waking nightmare. You see, when you're alone, you trust that nothing can go wrong. You believe the world outside your walls is distant, far away. But sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that you can't see. And sometimes they're already inside your home waiting. These aren't just stories. These are real-life experiences, things that happen to people who were in the exact same position you are right now. Alone, but not truly alone. He thought he would enjoy some peace and quiet. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend. His parents had left for a short trip, and he was home alone. No rules, no curfews, just him in the house. He was looking forward to spending his days doing whatever he wanted. Maybe play some video games, watch a few movies, get some extra sleep. It wasn't much, but it was his time, and for a teenager, that was all that mattered. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made everything feel safe, calm, almost too calm. But what started as an ordinary night quickly turned into something he would never forget. It was just after dusk when the first sound caught his attention. A whisper, faint at first, like someone was calling his name. He froze, staring at the TV screen, his heart skipping a beat. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe the wind, maybe an old pipe groaning in the walls. He brushed it off and turned up the volume on the TV. But then, a few minutes later, it happened again. The whisper was clearer this time. "Hey," it whispered. The voice was soft, barely audible, like it was coming from the other side of the room. He spun around, half expecting to see someone standing behind him. But the room was empty, and the faint sound of the whisper had vanished. He rubbed his eyes and tried to focus on the movie, but a feeling began to settle in his gut. Something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the unease. It felt like he was being watched. He pushed the thought aside. It had to be his imagination. After all, he was alone in the house. Nothing was going to happen. He stood up, walked to the kitchen to grab a snack, and then froze. The sound of something dragging across the floor came from the living room. His mind raced. Maybe the chair had moved, or maybe something had fallen. He couldn't think of a logical reason, but the sound was unmistakable, a slow, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the hardwood floor. His first instinct was to dismiss it, but the noise continued. Louder now, more insistent. He stepped carefully back into the living room. There was no one there, nothing out of place. But as he stood there, his eyes scanning the room, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. The shadows. The shadows seemed wrong. They were longer, stretching across the walls in strange, unnatural angles. He blinked. They were normal again. Or were they? He couldn't tell. Trying to ignore the feeling creeping up his spine, he took a deep breath and turned to leave the room. But then, he saw it movement in the corner of his eye. A shadow, just beyond the doorway. It wasn't cast by anything in the room. It was a shape, a dark figure standing in the hallway. He spun around, but nothing was there. His heart raced. It was just his mind playing tricks on him. That's what he told himself. But with every step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. He turned back to the hallway, just to reassure himself that nothing was there. He looked down the length of the hallway, nothing. The door to the bathroom was open, the light flickering just slightly. Everything seemed calm again. But then, as he turned to walk back to the living room, he heard it again, the whisper. This time it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus, faint but unmistakable. Multiple voices, all saying his name at once. "Come here," one voice murmured, and the others followed in a rhythmic pattern. "Come here." He tried to shake it off, but his legs felt frozen, as if they couldn't move. His heart pounded in his chest as he slowly turned to face the hallway again. The shadows were there again, stretching along the walls, longer this time. And in the distance, at the far end of the hall, he saw it. A figure moving slowly, deliberately. A tall, dark shape that seemed to glide across the floor. He couldn't make out any details, just the vague outline of someone. The shadow moved toward him, and his breath caught in his throat. His mind raced. Was it just his imagination? Or was there someone in the house with him? His pulse quickened. He was about to turn and run when the figure stopped. It was standing at the end of the hall now, just beyond the doorframe. His legs trembled. He wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. He had to do something. He had to know what it was. He slowly stepped toward the door. With a shaking hand, he reached for the knob. He hesitated, his heart hammering in his chest. The door creaked as he turned it, but when he pulled it open, there was nothing. No figure, no shadow, just the empty hallway. Nothing but the hum of the refrigerator in the other room and the faint rustle of the wind outside. He stared into the darkness, his breath ragged. Was he losing his mind? He had to be. Maybe it was just the stress of being alone. But then, the whisper came again. This time it was louder, clearer. Come closer. He slammed the door shut and backed away from it. His mind was racing now. He couldn't stay here. He had to leave. But where could he go? The house was his, and he was trapped. But as he turned to walk away, something caught his eye on the shelf. An old photo album. He didn't remember seeing it there before. Curiosity mixed with a sudden dread washed over him. He picked it up, flipping through the pages. The photos were old, faded. A family, his parents, and some distant relatives. But something was wrong. In one of the photos he saw it, a figure standing in the background just beyond the group. A shadow, but it wasn't like the others. It wasn't cast by anyone in the photo. And as his eyes focused, he realized with a jolt of fear the figure in the background wasn't anyone he recognized. It wasn't someone from his family. That person shouldn't have been there. His hand shook as he turned to look back toward the hallway. The whispers started again, but this time they were louder, more insistent. He wasn't alone. He had never been alone. What was supposed to be a peaceful night turned into a nightmare that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She'd always loved the quiet of her house, secluded, away from the noise of the city, surrounded by trees and rolling hills. It was the perfect place to unwind after a long week of work. But tonight, as she settled into her living room, something felt off. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't truly alone. It wasn't until the sun dipped below the horizon and the house began to settle into silence that the first sign of trouble came. She was on her couch, flicking through TV channels, when she heard a knock at the door. Not a knock from someone she recognized, just a soft, unexpected knock, sharp against the stillness of the house. She froze, staring at the door. It was too late for anyone to be visiting. Her heart skipped a beat. Maybe it was someone who'd gotten lost on the road, she thought. She stood up slowly, creeping toward the door to peek through the peephole. But no one was there. She hesitated, wondering if she should check her security cameras. She moved to the corner of the room where the monitors sat, her fingers trembling slightly as she brought the footage up on screen. There was nothing at the front door, no movement. But the camera caught something else. A shadow moving quickly, just outside. Her breath caught in her throat. The figure seemed to glide past, as if it was waiting for her to look. She blinked. The shadow disappeared, leaving only the darkness outside. Her mind raced. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or an animal passing by. She tried to push the feeling of unease away, but she couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. The night seemed to stretch on forever. She turned off the cameras and returned to her couch, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet where every sound seemed amplified. She tried to focus on the TV, tried to ignore the creeping sensation that something was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. That's when it happened again. Another knock, louder this time. She jumped, the sound shaking her out of her daze. It came from the front door again, but this time there was something different about it. It wasn't just a knock, it was a pounding, insistent sound, as if someone was trying to force their way in. She ran to the door, but when she looked through the peephole, no one was there. No one at all. Just the dark expanse of the night outside. Her pulse quickened. Her hands began to shake. She felt a chill creep down her spine, and she hurried back to the security monitor, checking the outside cameras again. This time the shadow was clearer. She could see it moving closer to the back of the house now. It wasn't the shape of a person. It was too fluid, too unnatural. The footsteps came next. soft at first, almost imperceptible. But as she listened, they grew louder, closer, as if someone was walking around her house, circling it slowly. She stood frozen, staring at the monitors. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from her friend. "Hey, I'm coming back soon, you good?" Her fingers hovered over the phone screen, unsure of what to say. What was she supposed to tell her friend? That there was someone outside her house, watching her. She glanced at the cameras again, looking for any sign of the person. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. The house was silent once more, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The knocking started again. This time it wasn't coming from the front door, it was coming from the back. The back door. The door she never used. The door she had locked hours ago. Her heart raced. She took a deep breath, gathering what little courage she had left. She crept toward the blinds, careful not to make a sound. Her hand shook as she reached for them, slowly pulling them apart just enough to see outside. There, standing in the darkness, was a man. His face was smeared with something dark, something that looked like blood. His smile stretched across his face, wide and unsettling, and he was staring right at her. The smile didn't reach his eyes. It was empty, cold. She gasped, pulling back from the window, her heart hammering in her chest. She couldn't breathe. What was he doing here? Why was he smiling like that? She rushed to grab her phone and dial the police, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She had to call them. She had to get help. But as she tapped the number to dial, her phone buzzed again. A call. She looked at the screen. It was her friend. She picked up the phone, her voice trembling as she said, "I need you to come here. There's someone outside." Her friend's voice came through the line. "I just got back, are you okay?" "I'm at the door." She froze. Her stomach dropped. No, that couldn't be right. Her friend wasn't here. He had just texted her. She hadn't heard a car pull up. She hadn't heard any sounds of anyone arriving. Her hand trembled as she glanced at the security cameras again. There was no one at the door. No car. No movement. She turned to look back at the back window. The man was still standing there. His smile was still there, wide and terrifying. The worst part wasn't just the fact that someone was outside her house. It was the way he stood there, unmoving, watching her, waiting for her to make a move. He knew she was inside. He knew she was watching him, and he wasn't going anywhere. She backed away from the window, feeling the panic rise in her chest. She couldn't stay here. She had to get out, but how could she? The man was watching. He was waiting for her to do something. She didn't know how long she stood there, paralyzed by fear. But the longer she stared, the more she felt like she was losing her grip on reality. What was happening? Who was this person? And why wouldn't he leave? All she knew was that the worst was still to come, and she had no idea how it would end. It was late. So late that the quiet of the apartment almost felt like it was pressing in on him, suffocating him. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, the only sound that filled the room. He sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV screen, his mind drifting aimlessly. He wasn't particularly tired, but something about the stillness of the night made everything feel off. Then, just as he was starting to settle into the silence, the phone rang. The sudden noise cut through the air, jarring him, pulling him back into reality. He reached for the phone, still half dazed, and glanced at the screen. A number he didn't recognize. He frowned. Probably a telemarketer. Or maybe someone wrong dialing. It wasn't unusual at this hour. He didn't give it much thought as he answered. "Hello?" At first, the voice on the other end sounded just like a wrong number. It was muffled, distant. Maybe the connection was bad. He tried to adjust the phone, thinking it might clear up. But then he heard it again. The voice distorted but unmistakably familiar. It sounded like his girlfriend. She was supposed to be out of town, visiting family, not even supposed to be back until tomorrow. He furrowed his brow, confused. "Hello? Who is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly cold. The voice on the line seemed to break up like static on a radio, the words distorted and jagged. But through the crackling, he could still make out parts of what was being said. She was talking to him. Or at least it sounded like her. But something was wrong. There was something about the way she spoke that was off. I missed you. I need you," the voice said. The words sounded too intimate, too familiar. It wasn't just the sound of her voice, it was the things she was saying. The details she knew. It felt wrong, like she shouldn't have known them. He gripped the phone tighter, staring at it like it was a foreign object. She knew things about him, things that only she could know. But how was she telling him these things from miles away? He hadn't told her about the car trouble earlier that day. He hadn't mentioned the phone call he got from work. He didn't even remember mentioning how lonely he'd felt when he got home. His heart began to pound. He tried to shake it off, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe she'd come back early and didn't want to wake him. Maybe she was messing with him, pranking him, playing some kind of joke. But the voice wasn't right. There was a strange distortion to it, a wavering, unnatural quality that made his stomach turn. And then, just as he was about to speak again, there was a pause. A heavy silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" The voice on the other end whispered. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The voice, it sounded like her, but it wasn't her. Something was wrong. His mind raced. What was going on? Who was on the other end of the line? Before he could answer, the phone call suddenly cut out. The line went dead with a click, leaving nothing but silence on the other end. He stood frozen for a moment, his breathing quick, his heart hammering in his chest. He looked at the phone, unsure of what to do. Was it just a prank? Maybe a glitch in the system? He was trying to make sense of it when, from the corner of his eye, he noticed something. A sound. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but then it became clearer, more distinct. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. His breath caught in his throat. He looked toward the hallway, the dim light from the kitchen spilling into the living room, casting long shadows on the walls. He listened carefully. The footsteps were getting closer, moving in his direction. He turned, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was eerily quiet, save for the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. He had to be imagining it. He was just overreacting. There was no one in his apartment. He had locked the door earlier, hadn't he? Then he saw it. There, standing just behind him, in the reflection of the window, was a figure. At first it didn't register in his mind. It didn't make sense. The figure was dark, shadowy, its outline blurred by the reflection. But the moment he turned, his blood went cold. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't his imagination. There was someone standing there, just a few feet behind him. A figure, tall and motionless. Their breath cold, heavy pressed against his neck. He could feel the weight of it, could feel the chill in the air, like someone had just opened a door to the outside. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest, but there was no one there. The apartment was empty. Nothing but the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall. He looked back at the phone in his hand, the faint echoes of the conversation still lingering in the back of his mind. That voice. It sounded like her, but it wasn't her. He had no idea who or what was in his apartment. The phone began to ring again. Slowly he raised it to his ear. This time there was no distortion. The voice on the other end was clear. But it wasn't his girlfriend. It was someone else, someone who shouldn't have known what he'd just seen. "You're not alone," the voice said, calm and cold. The worst part. The voice was coming from inside the apartment. And the thing on the other side of the phone, it wasn't the only one who had been watching him. The real horror doesn't stop here. What we've learned tonight is that sometimes the fear of being home alone isn't about the silence, or the darkness, or the emptiness that surrounds you. It's about the feeling that no matter where you go, no matter how much you lock the doors or pull the blinds, someone or something could be watching you, waiting. In the first story, the teenager thought he was just hearing things, dismissing the shadows and whispers as nothing more than his imagination. But when he opened the door to find nothing there, or so he thought, the truth hit him like a cold wave. He had been watched all along, by someone or something he didn't even know was there. Then, there was the woman, alone in her house, thinking she could relax in peace. But with every knock on the door, the unease grew, until she saw the man standing outside, the one who shouldn't have been there. And even when she thought she was safe, in the moment when she called her friend for help, she realized the truth too late. The man wasn't the only one watching her. The worst part, she never really knew who had been waiting for her to make a move. And finally, there was the man sitting in his apartment late at night, thinking he was alone. But the call on the phone, the voice that he thought was his girlfriend, wasn't coming from her. It was coming from somewhere closer, too close. From behind him, from within the very apartment that should have been empty. The fear wasn't just in the phone call, it was in the figure that stood behind him, breathing down his neck. A figure that should never have been there. In all of these stories, the real horror wasn't just the fear of being home alone. It was the constant dread, the realization that something was watching them, something that they couldn't see. something that didn't belong. And just when they thought they were safe, when they thought they understood what was happening, it was too late. But the scariest part of all, it's the question that lingers. What did these people really experience? Was it something supernatural, or was it just someone who knew exactly how to stay hidden in plain sight? Maybe the answer isn't so simple. Maybe it's a question that we'll never really have an answer to. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Sometimes, the true horror isn't what you can see. It's what you can't see, until it's too late. The shadows you think you've escaped. The noises you think are just your imagination. But what if they're not? What if there's something or someone waiting? And what if, just like the people in these stories, you never realize they were there until it's too late? And the next time you're alone in your own home, just remember, there's always that feeling, that sensation that something isn't right, that someone is watching. But can you really trust what your eyes are telling you? Or will you find out the truth when it's already too late? Now, before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Ever felt like something or someone was watching you while you were home alone? Maybe you've experienced strange noises, shadows in the corner of your room, or even that unsettling feeling that you're not really alone, even though you know you should be. If you've had something like this happen, I want you to drop your story in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Share what you felt, what you saw, or what you think really happened. Who knows, maybe you'll help piece together something even darker than we could imagine. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are plenty more stories coming your way, stories that will keep you up at night questioning everything around you. Don't miss out. Join us for more spine-chilling true horror tales that could be happening right now, just outside your window.